Yes, I should tell you just a few little things that brought me to notice him as I should have done. I went to Yale. I was Cambridge University, and then I went to Yale University for a couple of years in 1967. While I was there, I went up to George Eastman House, where Alvin's great collection is today. Mind you, the Royal Photographic Society has an extremely good one too, which is now in the National Media Museum in Bradford, for which I was able to select an exhibition for his centenary year in 1982. In 1966, I wrote him a letter from Yale, said that I'd seen his stuff at George Eastman House with Beaumont Newhall, who's the great historian of photography in America at that time. I sort of decided I was going to study him, and partly because I was interested in American literature. And if you know that at a particular moment in Alvin's career, he took up with Ezra Pound, American poet, who was part of the movement known as Vorticism, which was a modernist art movement that Alvin gave at least 48 hours of his time to. Well, actually, probably a whole week, let me not exaggerate, to prove that he could do something that they were perhaps challenging him to do. How do you modernize photography and bring it into the conspectus of modernist art when everybody else is going cubist and futurist? And my book on Coburn, I raise this question, and I demolish it, and then let it go. Because I see him as a photographer who came out of a great moment in Bostonian culture at the end of the 19th century, which was the centre in the Museum of Fine Arts of Japanese art, and where he came into contact with a man called Ernest Fenollosa, and who was in touch with a famous Japanese cultural writer, the Book of Tea, a man called Okakura. And the people who were in touch with that group in Boston split into 2 or 3 diverging directions. One of them was towards exactly the kind of closed order of studies of the larger life. That's to say, a quietist version of all the noise that was going on in the realm of theosophy in that period. And that was a group known as the Green Acre Fellowship. Today it's a Baha'i organization, but then it was, let's call it a place for comparative religion. And a man who ran a workshop for painting and printmaking nearby in Ipswich, Massachusetts, was a man called Arthur Wesley Dow, D-O-W. There's Taoism and there's Taoism. And so what I'm saying to you now is that Alvin, your dear friend, and my missed opportunity, insofar as I couldn't get back to North Wales in time, our great photographer, which he is, though neglected for all those years that he was not so heavily engaged in photography anymore, and not, as it were, capitalizing upon the great opportunities that others did in the same period. That world of Arthur Wesley Dow, the Green Acre Fellowship, the Ipswich School of Art, that combination of events was something which was deeply imprinted in him from the beginning, you might say, and was largely ignored by whole generations of people who did want to pursue modernist art and were more interested in him as a man who made a total of 12 photographs with the aid of 2 or 3 shaving mirrors owned by Ezra Pound on a light table. That's what you have to do to keep up. Even if your great work has nothing to do with keeping up, keeping well behind, so far behind that it goes back into something amounting to pre-European art history. I took it upon myself to take him on in the terms which I believed were his own terms. Here is this young man in England, somewhere around 1903 or 4, the sweet young man who, from the photographs you've already shown me today, becomes a sweet old man too. This is a self-portrait, at around about the same time or soon after. And I think if you see him here, you see him as someone who is already making a gesture with his fingers and hand here, which I won't interpret, but is fairly assertive in its nature. And the sidelong glance from his eye towards us suggests that he's a man you approach with some deference. I mean, that's to say, there's all the mark of the truculent adolescent in the face. But he is 17, 18, 19 years old. And he is suffering, it seems to me, from being a child prodigy. It must be very difficult to lose your father when you're 7 or 8 years old, to live with a stepfather who you don't get on with too well, to live with a mother who is ruling your life pretty considerably and will be by your side even when you're married, right through late into your life. And there is sign, if you like, in my mind at least, of somebody who is trying to make his mark, but not exactly the mark of the Mark Mason. Not yet. That will come after a much longer period of development, maturity, coming to terms with oneself. At this point, his nickname in the Royal Photographic Society, a group of people known as the Linked Ring, and the previous portrait, the one done by Frederick Evans, this one. Frederick Evans, who made this portrait, could have been, and in some sense was, old enough to be Coburn's father. But Coburn, coming from America, being an American, having influences behind him which were not all green acre, but really quite ambitious in the field of photography, which was a tremendous powerhouse of activity in this period from the 1890s onwards, led by Alfred Stieglitz on the one hand, and his rival, a man called Fred Holland, not Frederick even, but Fred Hollanday. Fred Hollanday self-portrait, dressed as if he is some kind of magus of the sort that ought to be in the Golden Order of the Golden Dawn. So you see, there are two sides potentially at work in Alvin's life. There's the world of Hollanday, very pro-British, devoted to Swinburne and Walter Payton, devoted to Keats, devoted to Oscar Wilde, devoted to what we could call the aesthetic movement or even the decadent movement. Hollanday is a distant cousin of Alvin, but takes Alvin under his wing because it's Fred Hollanday who is part of this Boston circle, as I've described as centred on the Museum of Fine Arts. So you see the two pressures applied to this young man and choices to be made. And not easy when you're 20, 21, 22, 23. And in Alfred Stieglitz, who was the man who edited this great magazine of photography, and is a great photographer himself, quite literally, Alvin is caught between the power plays which are coming in the politics of American photography circa 1900 for power and influence and running the organizations and organizing the exhibitions. You know, artists are a pretty dreadful lot when they start moving in on the notion of making themselves famous. And Alvin is caught right in the middle of them, with Hollanday promoting him on the one side and Stieglitz incorporating him in his great magazine called Camera Work. We're dealing with art politics, except it's photography politics. But that Arthur Wesley Dow, composition, a series of exercises in art structure for the use of students and teachers. He's a wonderful chap, this Arthur Wesley Dow. If you've ever heard of a painter called Georgia O'Keeffe, an American painter, I must tell you, there is a kind of blood brotherhood of photographers, which in Alvin's old age, I think, deeply touched him. Because in this kind of world I've just been describing in New York around 1900, with all these factions jockeying for position, there's a famous photographer who went on to run the photography department of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Edward Steichen, a very big name in the history of photography. He did the Family of Man exhibition, if you ever heard of that, in the 1940s, 50s. You have here in your library, I saw it in 1982, a book sent to Alvin from Steichen, Greetings. And the fellow feeling among the photographers, Steichen was Stieglitz's man, being pushed and pushed and pushed. And same age exactly as Alvin, coming from fairly similar backgrounds in many ways. Stieglitz was pushing Steichen, and Coburn's mother was pushing Alvin. Well, it's one thing to be pushed by Alfred Stieglitz, it's another thing to be pushed by your mother. Or even Gertrude Casebeer. But Arthur Wesley Dow is a really good fellow, on the square every time. Arthur Wesley Dow was a teacher. He taught all kinds of things, but he was the man who did terrific things for the development of American painting and graphic art. And this is the book which set it going. It had been in many editions. This is the 1913 edition. He was at Columbia University, the College of Education, Columbia College, they called it. And here he's showing how actually, as you can see here, the different shapes of the rectangle, whether they are tall verticals or landscape widths or middle positions, how you can arrange a few trees and space them correctly for the shape of the rectangle, and how the lines will create forms which sit perfectly within the frame. And this is Alvin in London in 1904 or 5, doing a Dow exercise, you might say, except he's doing it with terrific panache. He empties out the whole of this foreground so that half the picture, as it were, is empty. The trees produce a thicker tree and a thinner tree, and a lamppost, it looks like over here, all perfectly placed and spaced. And then this vehicle drawn by a horse or two, and on the omnibus, an advertisement for A1's brown sauce, which is sufficiently depressed for it to be a little bit of wit, a little bit of humour, but is not so strong that it robs the picture of its sitting beautifully settled and steady in our vision, and you'd hang it on your wall with perfect aplomb yourself. And it wouldn't be about A1 sauce, and it wouldn't be about two trees, and yet, you see, it is about just the ordered shapes and the human beings who constitute the omnibus, the all of it. It's the bus for all. It's plebeian, it's ordinary, but it's beautiful with it. And it's about A1 sauce? No, it isn't. It's about the picture itself. That's what it's really about. And that's how it's made. This is Hokusai. Well, you see, the big influence on Dow is indeed Japanese art, which is that world of Fenorosu and Nokakura. And here, this is the ferry boat. You can't see the ferry boat except in the shape and form of the decking. That's the boat bit. This is the steering oar and all the accoutrements that go with the actual handling of this gondola-like craft. But actually, this is a temple, a Japanese temple. And the title of the picture is something like The Temple at Whatever. it's not about the ferry boatman, but the framing of the temple is the thing the thing that lasts into eternity, at least in the imagination. And the man with his hairy legs is the man who is only gone for 80 years and 10 and gone again. He's here and gone. And the terrific energy and strength or skill employed in all this with the waveforms, which will change from moment to moment, are settled as a way of presenting that thing that might as well be a lighthouse but is actually a temple. Now, to do this, you suddenly realize that there is a technological element which comes into play in Coburn's work, and that is the invention of the telephoto lens in 1899 by a fellow called Dallmeyer, one of the great English firm of lens makers. Here in one of the publications of the Royal Photographic Society, Dallmeyer was president of the Royal Photographic Society in 1899, that kind of period. You see, here we are on some pier with a whale skeleton. And if you photograph it, you have a problem when you photograph a whale skeleton. How are you going to get it in the picture? It's big, it's long, it's wide. You can photograph it head on, though, if you want. You can do this. You can photograph it from a distance, and you can photograph it in relation to the pier. And you see, that's where it is, but it doesn't look much. But if you put on a telephoto lens and pull the whole scene towards you, and you take a section like this here, you then get this grid form here with its crossbars, the great horizontal figure, and above it you get the open jaws of the creature. And so, you know, we could shut off the picture somewhere there, and we'd have quite an interesting little picture. Do you see what I mean? If you just take this in the vertical. And it's really quite interesting because it actually looks as if it's about to eat the whole of the pavilion with its open jaws. The telephoto lens. And that's what he's applying. And now you begin to see that the telephoto lens allows him to bring these silhouetted figures into the same plane as this bridge, which is probably a quarter of a mile away. And these, well, we would be forced to call them abstract looking if they weren't triangular, a slant triangular. But you now see this intricate piece of geometry, which is actually framing off-center the top of this bridge of the suspension supporting tower with all these wires all coming between it, and these people working in the foreground. And so he's created in 2 dimensions. Over a large distance, he's put objects next to each other and framed things within certain spaces so that you see them bang right up against your nose, like the picture of the man, Hokusai, who is boating right in front of you, but boating like these people are working with their lifespan ahead of them, and the great span of the bridge, another kind of span altogether. And you don't have to take it any further than that. You don't need to interpret it in terms of, say, the circles and triangles, which are a common motif in this house, where they're so perfectly balanced. These are all askew. But as Alvin passes his years, goes through his years, he tends to straighten them out, you could say. See, it's this is Hiroshige of the Japanese. And it's all these views of Mount Fuji. And there is Mount Fuji, which is, of course, a triangle with a flat top. And here is the man sawing, seems pretty precarious to most of us, sawing a plane, a perfectly even slice of this great bulk of worked wood. And here are the various people who are engaged in their human activities. And it's a way of presenting the holy symbol, which is Mount Fuji, in a way which impinges upon or relates to lifetime craftsmanly activity, which seems to echo the shape of the mountain, though not perfectly, but framing it off-center in various ways, like that. And go to Wapping. You can find it in Wapping. Only, I don't know my London geography well enough. There are no trees on Land's End where I come from.
Very few anymore.
But all one can say is that what may be a power station ought to be something like a temple. And the man leaning back on his oar is the human skilled labourer, the ferryman. And the bowsprit, sail furled, not in action, but capable of being unfurled and moving, all implicit in the picture, you see. This is what Alvin does with that kind of composition, with that kind of Japanese view of life, where moving things and fixed things are related to each other in this geometric but fluid kind of way. Beautiful thing, beautiful idea, found in fact, found before your very eyes. Not drawn abstractly, but actually discovered by looking in your viewfinder. Oh my gosh. Move it a little bit to that way, move it a little bit this way. Put on your telephoto lens, but then introduce what we would think of as a kind of aerial perspective or a kind of impressionistic effect, where the weather, the dullness of the day, the dark and the light of it starts to contribute to the whole merging of it as an overall image. St. Paul's. You've never seen St. Paul's shown to you like that before, though. And these are wharf-side industrial elements, factory-made machine world elements. And the twin towers offset by the world of steel and iron, ancient and modern, secular and religious, all in the same picture, according to Arthur Wesley Dow's Japanese principles. The great cloud. Well, insofar as some of it's dark and some of it's light, well, it must be a cloud form. But it's not about, look at this beautiful fluffy cloud. It's about the light and the dark of it. It's about the dark and the light of it under the bridge. It's about this dome, which is in its shape, of course, so important in all forms of Western religious symbolism. It's also about this arch, which Langdon Coburn has not yet become a royal arch mason. Oh, no, 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 this is before 1910. This picture, this is 1906 or 7. He's not got masonry on his mind at all, but he's got the royal arch. And he's got the multiple means by which the cornerstones are repeated endlessly across it. But he's not an royal arch mason yet. But he's already, you might say, this is my argument, if I have one, he's already found it. He's found it, in fact, before he has learned it symbolically. And incidentally, there's a problem here. I mean, St. Paul's Cathedral is actually sitting on top of a bridge. Hang on a minute. This is geographically incorrect. Not only is it unlikely that the tonnage would crack even that arch, but it's not topographically correct. But we know what happens in pictures in Rome. We know what happens when people talk about the Pontifex, the man who bridges the here and now with the long-range future, the bridge builder. That's what the Supreme Pontiff is meant to be doing, in making the above and the below not just vertical, but horizontal too. And somehow he's managed to put St. Paul dead centre over the arch. Well, it's the telephoto lens that's done that. He's taken this over a distance of more than 2 miles, and with a long enough lens, you can put St. Paul's on top of a bridge, which is an arch. Or in New York, you can do something, not the same, because they're a bit short of Christopher Wren buildings. They have to make do with the Brooklyn Bridge. But see then, even in that horizontal format, the relation between the steamer, the freighter, the ferry, and the ferry to Brooklyn, you might say. The moving, waterborne element. And now the road bridge with its wonderful curve on it and its tower, which takes it actually somewhat Gothic, as you know, criticised by modernist architects as not really fit for a modern American bridge made in the 1870s, 1890s. But you have something else instead, which is you have the steam power of this and the bits of smoke coming off here, which are probably industrial. And you have the great, not arc of the bridge as an arch, but the cantilever effect, which of course is not necessary, which is another form of bridge building. So it's really, he's gone to work in another mode for another subject in another city. Tower bridge, twin towers. Again, Gothic, not very suitable for the middle of the 19th century. No, not really. But nevertheless, evoking a sense of a past and a past history, and foregrounded by this mass of, what should we call it, the great work of London, which is trade and business and the shipping and moving of goods by barges, heavy in nature, set against the Tower Bridge, which is fairy-like, fragile by comparison.
Sure.
Now, not in this particular slide, I don't believe, but what I ask you is this. Is this smoke or is it steam? It matters. Smoke is the adulterated version of steam. Smoke is the waste pipe of the steam that powers the engine, which in a good print, and if you were able to have a fine one as a platinum print, you would see what even I can see. This is a locomotive going across a locomotive bridge right there in the heart of London. It's the industrial age entering in the form of, well, in a locomotive, the whistle is the steam, as it were. The smoke is the burning power of the engine, capacity of the engine. The sanctuary and the cloud upon the sanctuary, the cloud underneath the sanctuary. And you see, he's not written his mystical writings yet at all. He's made it in a picture, and you can smile about it because it is contradictory. You can see the options open to you, and you must take what you get. And if I have an argument in favour of the artistic as opposed to the mystic, is the mystic has to contrive everything, otherwise it's not theoretically correct. Whereas the artist can improvise wherever he goes and passionately express it just as well with a smile on his face. So these are the choices, you see. The Houses of Parliament. But how come the Houses of Parliament looks as if it might be a version of Westminster Abbey? Just for your information, I discovered only last week, going through my box of papers to talk to you, I found a letter from a woman that I'd written to in the Red Cross in Merionethshire in 1982, asking about him in his uniform when he, Alvin, was head storekeeper for the whole of Merionethshire, as well as head of everything else, as well as having a private hospital, 15-bedded in his place of retreat. She wrote back and said, because I said, is that St John's ambulance? Because I know he's in the St John ambulance, and I've seen St John ambulance men at football fields, No, she says, it's Red Cross. And by the way, she said, I was talking to Mrs. So-and-so the other day. She said, she wanted me to tell you that Mr. Coburn was baptised as an Anglican on the 17th of October 1930, was confirmed, and was a lay reader in the church in Wales in 1935. So you see, he joined everything. He joined everything and everybody. Because he was, as they say, and the subtitle to my book, Simplest Photographer, that was all the American publisher could handle. But my original title was Alvin Langdon Coburn, Beyond the Craft, which I found among his Masonic writings and take to mean something even beyond the craft. And the craft is going quite a long way, but the craft is still relatively mechanically, symbolically, stock and barrel-y. You see what I mean? Whereas beyond the craft is, from my point of view, flying the flag for art as opposed to mysticism. I'm not saying that they're irreconcilable, not for one moment. But flying the flag for him as artist. He already knew all this before he knew it fit to write about it in the language of a kind of doctrine or an order of service that would be fitting to the best principles of a religion. So, here is our ferryman, except probably not. He's actually one man at the heart of it, because we can't see any of the others, so we're left with this one figure here, coming here, with two gigantic oars. Think of the responsibility on the River Thames at midday, with time cutting straight through Big Ben and eliminating time itself, cutting a kind of arrow through it. It's timeless, and this figure then gets the rebound effect, as it were, because this figure of the man, all in his boat with his barge too big to handle, straining to maintain the balance of this vehicle in the face of the temple, which is actually, of course, just the House of Commons, just the House of Lords. So, but actually, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, people streaming over the bridge to work. How many are so undone as they stream over the bridge. Kind of hopeless vision of the wasteland, the spiritual wasteland. But yes, it's the same movement, and it's now, on this huge diagonal, and there are these supports to the bridge, and the bridge is the chance, we have a chance to move from one point to another, and we don't think about how we're going, how fast we're going, whether we're rushing to something or rushing away from something. And actually the things that are solid, the pontoons. Well, Hiroshige has been there before us, you see. And all you can say is that, yes, of course, this is such a famous print. Van Gogh painted it. He painted it in oil. He painted it again for himself. That generation of people interested in art, they knew these pictures. But it's no act of copying. It's a refinding of the image in a form which is relevant to your culture that you have adopted in London, which is relevant to the world of T.S. Eliot. But he hasn't written his poem yet. T.S. Eliot hasn't written The Wasteland when Coburn makes his picture. So how can any of this be true, except that it must be deeply imprinted somewhere? See this, and you have one or two of these in Fairy Reviewer, your collection somewhere. I think it's such a beautiful picture because you see, the pontoon meets the pontoon, the bridge meets the fixed element. And the twin pillars are there. Oh, yes. The arch is there, but there was never an arch in Freemasonry that made a shape which was halfway towards the Islamic shape, the architecture of the mosque. But you know what I mean. And it's before his very eyes. It's not something that he drew and made up. It's something he found in the viewfinder. This is one of the most wonderful things about the viewfinder camera. Hard to do with a modern digital one, where you hold things up and point them more or less. When you are a photographer using his kind of apparatus, you look into the viewfinder on the flat plate, as it were, of the glass, and you see things upside down and inside out, lateral and vertical reversal. That's where the act of abstraction takes place, before your very eyes. And that's where you make your adjustments, and now you're making them formally. But actually you're always looking up at the same time, you see. You're exchanging between what you're doing with what is out there in front of you. It's like the painter with the marl stick. And then you're doing things that people would say, oh, that's a bit funny. That shape there is a bit funny. But it's not funny when it's got so dark underneath here and so light over here. And why is the nose of this meeting the nose of that? The movement in this is extraordinary. The men with the horse, which works on the towpath, no doubt. Working men of London. The bargee with his barge. The torque, T-O-R-Q-U-E, the twist on the bridge itself. The bend on it. The tension of it. And then, this anti-perspective, going the wrong way from normal kinds of perspective, but coming towards you. This great arrow, rounded, this great blade of light coming down in that direction. Oh, he's done it again, but quite differently. He's done it earlier than that last one. He's done it in Edinburgh. A passage between tall lands. The tall lands are tenement buildings. A passage. What? A passage of what? A foot passage? Well, yes. No, a passage of light. Oh, where's the light coming from? Well, not from that light bulb. gas bulb, gas fitting. No, the sun is coming through that. Real sun is coming through the artificial light source, and the real sun is coming from way beyond down there, down here. And he may have even worked a little on this line. And what then? Well, we all know about the ladder of ascent, but this ladder has only got 2 steps on it. Yes, if you're the inhabitant of a tenement building, this is the window which has bars, more like St. Peter in the dungeon, the death of Christ. It's the, in fact, you're in the cellar, but there is this light and there is this penetration of light. It's lights, you see, it's only a lamp standard. Well, no, it isn't. It's a very beautifully constructed lamp standard with its 3 elements, one laid over the other. And with these pinnacles, it doesn't matter. And look, there's a bit of roadway here, and there's this shape here, but it's about against the sky. It's about those elements of the pinnacles and the finials and the lamps. The twin towers, well, the temple at Jerusalem, but actually Westminster Abbey, but they're all the same. And then these globes, these orbs, all crossed into with ironwork, which is significant to us, and foliage in between. There's a little book that I came across all those years ago, Harold Bailey, Bayley, The Lost Language of Symbolism, 1912. Well, he'd made the pictures by 1912, so he didn't get it out of the book. But you see, where did Harold Bailey get it from? Where's everybody getting anything from? There is always some other source, but that's where I got it from. And it's the things that I'm picking up on here from these watermarks and printers' marks in the books of the Albigensians, of the medieval Knights Templar and the rest of it. The motifs that I'm interested in, of course, are these V shapes, which are the light shapes, the wheels, the vehicles within the round, the vehicle as part of the round, the boat having become attached to the cross, which is also the mast, as it were, of the boat. All these the so-called spectacle ornament and so on, all these and the ladder and the rest of it. I'm saying that Coburn has got this stuff already from that world of the Greenacre Fellowship, one way or another, and it's already in his pictures before he becomes an adept, even an epoch. No, I'm saying that actually the relations between art and religion are much more interesting in the 20th century in general, thanks, and at the expense sometimes of some error, no doubt, in theosophy, which puts people in possession of thinking more widely about things than simply their own immediate historical cultural upbringing, which is very important in its own right. Of course it is. It's the local and the particular thing in which you're most comfortable, but which you may wish to extend. The next. We're getting there. Yes, the ladder of ascent leading to the Sphinx. The ladder of ascent leading to Pan. But more interesting even than that, 2 versions, Northern and Southern Zen. Northern Zen is what you might call more step by step. Yes, step by step. Southern Zen is instant revelation. And over here, with the black cat, you might get instant revelation coming in through those trees. But here, you stand at the foot of these steps because you see there's the stain of you standing there. That's where you were standing. And you mount slowly. But actually, if you're not careful, you only end up with Pan anyway. Arwen. Inspiration, aspiration, genius. You know, he called his house in Wasansi Arwen. There's a relation between these verticals, these black lines which are in the Arwen, and in the roundels, the round marks which make up the Arwen emblem. And it's actually somewhere in here, not very visible, I admit, but somewhere in there is Cleopatra's Needle. It's the embankment, and St. Paul's is there again. But is it not the National Gallery? And what is the difference between the National Gallery and St. Paul's? That depends on your view of art and religion. And in this patch of water here, this strange new hieroglyph, which takes place in front of you from these orbs of light following the great curve in the context of the great dome. The candlestick motif is the light going in two directions now by mirror reflection, as above, so below as above. We've got both money going together now. And here is wild nature. And here is ornamental nature. And we like to have it both ways, especially if we're British. It depends. Some people are secretly more interested in the wild than in the ornamental. But we acknowledge there is a relation between the two. And we're nearly at the very end now, so if you're getting tired, be brave. I'm nearly through. There's a book which came out about 5 years ago, edited by the man who was in charge of photography at the Victorian Albert Museum, Mark Hayworth Booth, who is now retired, one of my old friends. And he asked me to write about Coburn. 100 great photographs of photography. And he said, Mike, will you do one of the photographs perhaps? And I said, absolutely not. I'll tell you what I will do though. I'll do Fountain Court, and he let me. And published by who's that? The Folio Society has published this beautiful book, and I wrote a piece opposite it, which may bear some resemblance to what I'm about to tell you, may not. Basically, though, well. So what have we got? We've got this mass of foliage. He's actually standing in the apartment, the flat of Arthur Symonds, the great writer on London. Fountain Court is one of the most mysterious and beautiful parts of London, next to the law courts. There's a very special place in people like the world of Chesterton, Symonds. And they're looking down from Symonds' apartment, says Coburn, when he makes this. And what does he do? This mass of trees and foliage, looking through them, as it were. And what are the component parts? This pathway here, which if you brought it out to here, would form a triangle for this one going behind the trees here. There's the path continuing and going on up through there. If you believe that, you believe anything. There's a straight triangle there, impeded by foliage, glistening and beautiful. And then there's the circle. Well, it is a circle, but not from this angle it isn't. It's an ellipse. It's this one here. And within the ellipse, there's another ellipse, which is the fountain of Fountain Court, that little bit there. See? And who is this? Well, but it may as well be Gertrude Casebeer. It may as well be Mary Madonna. It is the source. Oh, it's the great wheel of law. But from this angle, from the top of a skyscraper in New York, yes, Ezra Pound would say in one of his cantos, because I've read them, I'm one of the few who have read them, and I know what's good about Ezra Pound and I know what's bad about him too. But even Coburn called it the octopus. Now, when Ezra Pound says it's the octopus, it's an image of chaos and disorder. And worse than that, it's actually an image of woman. It's profoundly chauvinistic. And the great tower, which is there shadowing it, the great tower is the only thing that could nail it. But it can't actually. But it's an extraordinary picture by Coburn, and I don't know which way to go. And I see the difference between this and the picture of Fountain Court as really diametrically opposed to each other. I was reading this the other night because you very kindly gave me a copy of this when I came to see you in 1982. I've read it many times, and I only have one criticism of it, which is that it seems to have been written mostly with science in mind. I don't mean not a science of theosophy with a small t, in the best sense of the word, theory. Economic science. I mean that there's much talk of the inductive and the deductive, and there is some talk of the eductive, E-D-U-C. Yes, I like that one a lot. But there's not much mention of art. There is no mention of art in it at all. And I don't think that's fair. But you see, when you look at something which is yours, not mine, but when you see this thing, you realise that there's a sense in which all those things that I've been trying to talk about are there in the work before he made or saw made a perfect diagram of it. And life is about the imperfect mess of it. And art is of the same order. Not too much disorder, thanks very much. No, I don't want that either. I'm not pleading for that. I'm not pleading for Hollanday. I'm pleading for Mondrian and Kandinsky and one or two others. But Alvin found it for himself before he formulated it. And if I consider, I'm not a teacher in any, I'm a teacher in that sense that the German might think that the word Dichter might be a teacher. Our word teacher is related etymologically to your word Dichter. No, I'm not a poet either. I make no claims to be a poet. But what I do make claim to be is somebody who leaves some other people ready to think about things in a slightly different way. Not rejecting anything they would have to say, I can tell you. I'm wondering what he would say. What would Alvin say? But I do accept the idea that a man at a certain time of his life, or a woman, can do things which they can't maintain because you can't do what I was describing with the 35mm held to the eye camera. You can't come out of the kind of background that knows Japanese art and knows the world of comparative religion, which was beginning to take its modern form, various formulas as represented by psychoanalysis. We'll have Alvin's voice as soon as I finish. Here he is. Here he is. These streaks here are just dirt on my 30-year-old slide. Sorry. There he is. This is the wheel of good law. It's called the Copper Plate Printing Press, where he made 40,000 gravures with his assistance of his friend. What was he called? Good name. His name was Stone. I believe he was an alchemist from the East End. And this is Arthur Wesley Dow, that man who taught him composition. And the great bowl, the great flat copper bowl, and within it, this bit here, which is somewhat chaotic, because it takes all these reflections and throws them back at you. But the edge of it, a perfect round.
Did Alvin take that photo?
Yes. That's a picture of Dow by Alvin. Very early, 1903. And then he went with Dow on his wedding trip to California. He went with his dear wife. What was she called? Edith. He took his mother home, and he took Arthur Wesley Dow. And he photographed in the Grand Canyon with him. He photographed in California with him. And he photographed this observatory, which Annie, who was born in California, thinks may be about Wilson Observatory. And what is this thing, this perfect dome from which you look upon the universe and the stars, the perfect round? And what's touching it but foliage? And the perfect round, somewhere in my memory, I couldn't find it for you if I tried. I know that the perfect round is somewhat eccentrically described sometimes the branch gatherer. The branch gatherer. Well, there's the branch, and there it's gathered in a round, and they are visually opposite, you might say, shape and form. But we can't have our world of a spiritual future without a life on earth to experience it first. And so if we hear Alvin's voice at the end of his lecture to the Royal Photographic Society, there he is. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have St. John Ambulance badges attached to his Red Cross uniform. But there he is in 1946. He is the spectacle ornament. Yes, he wears glasses like all of us. and he sees in several directions.
Okay.
So, can we hear his voice? This is the end of his speech to the Royal Photographic Society, the exhibition in 1962. The introduction was by his friend, who accepted a wonderful gift of his work for the Royal Photographic Society. Let's hear it now.
And now I have come to the end of the story of my photographic adventures. But I am sure you will agree with me that the greatest adventure of all is the adventure of life. Literature tells us of life. Poetry and music inspire us to look for its beauty. Photography and painting illustrate it. Ethics and religion reveal its harmony and its essential goodness. Philosophy explains its truth, and the culminating art of the perfect life of the mystic leads the soul out of the limitations of time and space into the beholding of the unity of the eternal now. Friends have asked me why I had for many years ceased to devote my energies exclusively to photography, after having attained a certain proficiency in it through a life dedicated to its mysteries. The answer to this is that I think spiritual concerns are more important, and the art of the interior life to be more vital and significant to the supreme and ultimate purpose of the human soul than any other activity. If you compare photography and religious mysticism as alternatives to which one should devote one's life, there can be no doubt as to the ultimate choice, or their respective values of importance. The greater choice, however, always includes in some manner all the others. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all other things are added unto you. For religious mysticism is the peak of the range from which even the vistas of photography may be beheld in an ever newer, richer, and more mysterious radiance. Photography teaches its devotees how to look lovingly and intelligently at the world. But religious mysticism introduces the soul to God.
So he had the last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to give this book to you for your collection, for anybody who would want to borrow it at some time. It's a book that I wrote in 1985 or 6. It's called The Photographic Art, Pictorial Traditions in Britain and America. And there are 100 pictures, and 4 of them are by Alvin. In 1989, I was one of the selectors, and I edited the catalogue of the Royal Academy's exhibition called The Art of Photography, which is the 150th anniversary of photography in Britain. And Coburn was extremely well represented there, but I haven't got a copy of that book to give you right now.
No, that's very generous of you.
Please.
I'm just going to thank you very much on behalf of the Trust of this. I'm just going to say thank you at this point.
Yes.
You know, we're bound to carry on speaking. Thank you, both of you.
I was thinking maybe if we
Yes,
had tea,
and then
after tea.
yes,
Just
good. So we
lay
haven't
out some of the actual photographs, and then I can tell
Good.
people how they're
good. So because Annie's going to contribute to another dimension. So, but let me just say thank you for those who perhaps will need to go.
Yes.
And so we'll sort of draw it to to get together. You've done actually what nobody else could have done, which is through your expertise to enable us to see the world through Alvin's eyes. No one else could have done that for us. And what you've done is to show us that all the time there is the pull of the spiritual world in his life. What he has then done in the recording is make it very clear indeed that he didn't give up photography, he didn't sacrifice one activity for another, and nor do any of us, because the highest choice includes everything else. And so that's just beautifully finished off that part of the afternoon. So thank you very much.